Let's say that you are, for example, an employer who is focused upon an employee who is not pleasing you. So clearly, because of the way you feel, you're not focused upon what you want. You're focused upon what you've got, but you're not focusing upon what you want. And you can tell by the way you feel that you're not in alignment with who you really are and what you really want. You could find the vibrational essence of an improved employee, but you're not. Instead, you're focusing upon what you've got. So now you go down that path further and further. Your deviation from what you want and what you've got gets stronger and stronger. You could have turned it around earlier and easier. You didn't have to go so far, but finally it goes far enough that you fire that employee. Well, it's an action that in some cases we think is a good one. In other words, it could be easier for you. In fact, we would say it would be easier for you to find your path of greatest alignment relative to that position that you want to feel, now that that person who isn't doing a good job isn't there. In other words, now they're not there to observe. It's more likely that you could think about what you want and find vibrational alignment with it and then attract it. But most don't, because they fire the person and then they think about why they fired the person. They hold themselves in the vibrational pattern, even though the person is no longer there. They hold themselves in the vibrational frequency of the unwanted. So whether it's this example or a relationship or anything, the tendency is to be so conditioned to focus on conditions that even when you sometimes make a very good decision, which is to put yourself in a better position where that condition isn't beating up on you anymore and isn't controlling the vibrational frequency, still in your guilt about not pleasing them, in your guilt about doing what you think is best for you, you hold yourself in those patterns where things can't improve. So the next one's pretty much like the last one. Different faces, different places, but same experience keeps happening to you. Is this making sense to you? So what would be a better plan? Well, a better plan would be, before it gets so uncomfortable, to make a new decision about what you want. Because if you could make a better decision, a clearer decision, say it again, a clearer decision, say it more specifically, a clearer, less resisted statements. In other words, clearer meaning purer, meaning fewer contradictions about it, throwing less contradiction on the path. So if you could make, even when you still have this employee who is not pleasing you, if you could stay focused upon what you want, that employee would either come with you or go away, but you wouldn't reach that place, that great crescendo of discomfort. You see what we're getting at? So when you decide that you're going to play it out vibrationally and emotionally rather than in terms of conditions, what begins to happen is the conditions begin to take care of themselves. You begin creating from what we are calling the inside out. You begin holding your own vibrational patterns in alignment with who you really are, and then everything else just becomes a cooperative component to the vibrational essence that you have established. So we want to say to you, to make it even clearer, you are human beings, not human doings, which means you are offerers of vibration. And yes, of course, you are also actors. You are also those who offer action. But if you let yourself believe that the action trumps everything, so you're just acting and reacting, then you're not taking care of the vibration, and then the reactions are just following the path of greater and greater resistance. We think you heard most of that. It was a pretty good unfolding. So now where are you?
Apparently you're reading my mind. Because I have that exact situation at work and trying to figure out what to do with it, with an employee. So you answered the question I didn't even ask yet, but thank you.
Well, the thing is, we want to put this statement in the mix, and then we'll clarify it because it sounds like a flawed statement. You can't get there from there. Now, to clarify, what we want to say is, you can't get to where you want to be with action. You've got to get to where you want to be with vibration. But sometimes taking an action gives you a reprieve from things that were keeping you vibrationally out of whack. And that's what so many of you are not willing to give yourself a break without feeling guilty. And so when you remove something unwanted from your experience, you usually don't remove the unwanted vibration because you stand in a justifying mode or a defensive mode, where if you could just take the action and make a statement to yourself, I'm doing the best that I can do, and this was a good choice for me, and then let it rest a little bit. Don't keep it active by talking about it. What will happen is your true vibration will take hold. It's like, so let's go back and revisit that strong statement that we made. You can't get there from here. You can't get there from where you are. What do we mean? Don't try it conditionally. Do it vibrationally. But wait, Abraham, you just suggested that maybe it might be a good idea for me to give myself permission to remove myself from the unwanted condition. Yes, we did. We think you should remove yourself from every unwanted condition if you can. But once you remove yourself from the unwanted condition, you've got to take the more important step, which was always the more important step, which is remove yourself from the vibrational patterning. And you'll reach the place that you can take the vibrational patterning without the action. You will. But in the meanwhile, do whatever it takes to feel better about where you are. How's that? Do you think that overnight this person is going to become adequate in all of those ways?
No.
So if you feel that you would feel better not bumping up, we're not talking about getting the job done. We're just talking about how you personally feel, because how you personally feel is everything, because how you personally feel has everything to do with the way you translate vibration. And in your vortex is the perfect employee that you can't find because you're bumping up against somebody that's keeping you mad all the time. You see what we're getting at? So what's the path of least resistance? To bump up against something that doesn't feel good? Well, the path of least resistance would be to be such a powerful creator that you're not bumping up against it. But are you there? You're not there. You're bumping up against it. So what's your path of least resistance? How are you going to keep from bumping up against it? Can you give yourself permission to meet your needs or your desires first? So let's say you decide, that's the path of least resistance. The path of least resistance is for that person to not be there. Now what happens? What happens if that person were not there? So let's say that you've made that move and now that person is not there. Now what happens? What happens to the work? Was any work getting done?
A little.
So what happens now that little bit of work that was getting done isn't getting done, but all of those mistakes that were being made aren't being made? Right. Does it still remain the path of least resistance for you?
Somebody has to replace her.
You're getting too far down the road. We're just asking you, do you feel better now that that condition has changed? Do you feel better? Because you might feel worse. In other words, you might say, no, now nobody's answering the phone. But that's what we mean when we say only you can answer that. You've got to take the path of least resistance for you. You can't do what Dr. Phil says that you should do. You can't do what the debate on the talk show says is the right thing to do. You can't even get twirled up in what it means to that person who had a job who now doesn't have a job, because that just adds clutter to your path. We're just asking you, is it really so complicated that you can't say, I feel better with this than that? It's so interesting because it's so hard for most people to give themselves permission to feel better, because it feels like you should be serving the other. Often it feels like you should be serving the other. So let's say that you make that decision and that person is no longer there and you're no longer bumping up against that. Now you have some other choices, because you can remember bumping up against that and justify your actions by remembering that. But now you're still bumping up against it. So the action you took is not serving you at all because you're still bumping up against it. So now the next question is, are you less likely to bump up against it now that it's not there in your experience than you were? Or are you going to justify your behavior by explaining to everybody why you took the action? What's the path of least resistance for you? And by that we mean, which path are you most likely to take right now? Did you find relief in the letting go of this person? Did you find any relief?
Yes.
And now, can you find relief in the expectation of someone to replace that person? And are you more or less likely? In other words, do you think you're going to, this time, be as likely to keep defending and justifying? Or did you already have an experience that showed you what that yields, and so has a different path of lesser resistance showed itself to you?
Absolutely.
And what does that path look like? How might that play out to you?
Concentrating on the positive aspects of it.
But that might be too big of a jump. And from where you are, can you concentrate on the positive aspects, or can you just feel the relief of not bumping up against that? So are you going to beat up on yourself for your misattracting, for your attracting what you don't want? Or are you going to appreciate yourself for your guidance system?
Appreciate.
That's the path of least resistance, isn't it? Are you going to be mad at yourself for the slowdown in work that's getting done? Or are you going to appreciate the fresh start that you're giving yourself?
Appreciate.
Path of least resistance. Are you mad at yourself for where you stand? Or are you understanding that you can get to wherever you want to be from wherever you are? Do you feel more futile or less futile? Does it feel clearer or more convoluted? How do you feel in this scenario that we're unfolding?
Clear.
Feel clear?
Yes.
So you do feel clear because you've given yourself permission to do whatever it took to feel clear. You gave yourself permission to take action. You gave yourself permission to find a better feeling thought. There's no formula that's right or wrong, but you're the only one who can make it from where you are. So here you are, you're standing here. You still need someone to fill that slot. You feel better that at least the mistakes aren't being made. So here you're standing in this place of lesser resistance than you've had for a while. So these vibrations that have all of the answers, the vortex that's full of everything you want, are you more likely or less likely to pick up on some of that?
More likely.
More likely. And as those thoughts come, what's the emotional manifestation that comes? That feeling of clarity, that feeling of stability, that feeling of adventure, that feeling of well-being, that feeling of optimism, that feeling of eagerness. You're starting to feel lighter. Your business doesn't feel lost. You don't feel lost. Nothing feels as heavy as it did. Everything feels lighter. In fact, right now you're sort of wondering why you made such a big hairy deal about all of that, but then the big hairy deal went away, so it's easy not to worry about the big hairy deal when the big hairy deal is not there. But the bottom line is you feel better now, yes?
Absolutely.
So now, are you more likely or less likely to receive a thought or an impulse?
More likely.
And when that impulse comes, is it more likely or less likely to lead to something that is pleasing?
Way more likely.
And isn't it logical, knowing the formula or the pattern of the vibration turning from the vibration to the creation? Isn't it more likely now that you really are on that path? Won't you feel enlivened? Aren't you clear about the interview that you will offer? Don't you know more now what you're looking for? Won't you know it more when people sit before you and you're interviewing? Aren't you more likely to have a pure vibration that is bringing from them what you want rather than a scattered vibration that's bringing some of all of it? Isn't it more likely that the universe will bring to you potential people that you might hire that are more in harmony with who you are when there's clarity in your vibration instead of a jumble?
Absolutely.
And doesn't it now make perfect sense that before you did that you couldn't get there from there? You see what we're getting at?
Yes.
And wasn't it fun all along the way? Don't you like figuring things out? Don't you like knowing what you want? Aren't you appreciative of the clarity that was given to you? Didn't people who aren't doing a good job help you to identify even what a good job is?
Definitely. Yeah.
Isn't it fun to gather together with talented people who are, for whatever reason, in alignment with who they are, who then have the best probability of the most being evoked from them? Is it logical that if you're not in alignment with who you are, that you could hire someone else who is in alignment with who they are? Isn't it logical that they would reflect to you how you're feeling?
Definitely.
And that they would play back to you how you're feeling? Isn't it nice that they helped you sort out how you want to feel? And wasn't it nice that you took the path of least resistance, that nobody else gets to decide whether it's right or wrong? You got to decide. And don't you feel better now that you feel clear? And now that you feel clear, isn't it logical that it's going to unfold in a way that is pleasing you? See how it works? You got to give yourself permission to do what feels best for you. But first you've got to decide what doesn't feel good and what